New Mexico is a land of stories, myths, and legends. The unexplained and the unexplored. I'm Chad Brummett, and we are exploring the unique and unusual world of New Mexico Strange.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on this inaugural episode of New Mexico Strange. I'm Chad Brummett, and so glad that you are joining us for this. So this is a new show that we're going to be doing here at KRQE, exploring all sorts of different stories. Obviously, New Mexico is ripe with UFOs, ghosts, chupacabra, whatever you want to think. There are some great stories that may be hiding under the covers, and this is the show that is going to unpack them. So with this first show, I thought that I would start with two very good friends and two people that I think are experts in the field of the paranormal. Two guys that I absolutely love reading, watching on documentaries, hearing stories about. First up, Mr. Ben Radford, who is an author, who is a podcaster, Squaring the Strange. And you have also appeared, you may think, this guy looks kind of familiar. You've probably seen him on some National Geographic documentaries, History Channel. So Ben, thanks for being here. Sitting next to him, Mr. Cody Polston, who has the coolest hat in the building.
Oh, thank you.
Also an author, a ghost tour host, investigator. And I couldn't think of anyone else to do this inaugural show with. So guys, thanks for being with us. I want to start, before we dive into today's topic, finding out how you guys got into this. And Cody, we'll start with you. How did you get into ghost investigation, paranormal investigation? What brought you into this world?
I was young. I was like 8 years old. And my brother and I were sent to a place called Camp Christmas Tree. So it's a day camp, like a 30-minute drive out of Amarillo, you know. And on the way to the day camp, we always pass this old house. And it's just like curiosity. Well, there's one time of the year where we're allowed to stay overnight. So the older group of kids, which I was in, they were going to take us to go see the haunted house, right? So we got on the bus, there were like 6 counselors. We got off the bus, and they're leading us up this arroyo, and we come across this cow that's been massacred. I mean, pieces of the cow were missing. Gosh. So the counselor's like, ugh. So they direct the kids around, and I noticed even as a kid that some of them were like concerned. I know 2 of them left, and they were talking something about a sheriff, probably to go get that person. But anyway, they went in, took us to the house anyway, took us upstairs, and they started telling us ghost stories. And what I remember as a child is a door opened, and we saw a counselor shut it, and the door opened again. And the next thing, all these kids are screaming, and I'm in the middle of them, and they're rushing us out of the building, and then they're frantically counting the kids. Well, I'm watching the front door, and there's a window next to it, and it parts. And this big, bushy, bearded guy looks out. I'm, what the heck? Anyway, so they take us back. We're all locked up in a building with the 22 rifles that they would teach us to shoot with. Yeah. It's Texas. And so, I remember the cops showing up. And then after that, it was like, did they catch the guy that hurt the cow? What happened? My parents were like, nah, you don't need to worry about that. Don't worry about it. Same thing with the counselors. They wouldn't talk to me. So I got, first of all, interested in horror movies like Dracula, Wolfman, sure. The old Universal films.
Oh, yeah, my favorites.
And then I also became really fascinated with like Sherlock Holmes, Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys. And you take those two things and you mix them up, and that's how I got into it. That's how my interest started.
Yeah, so, Okay, Ben, how about you? How did you get into this?
That's creepy, man. I don't know about that. It's I grew up in Corrales, and I remember kicking around. When I would go to the local used bookstore. I'm always a big reader, writer, and this and that. And so I remember I would take my allowance, 5 crumpled dollar bills, and walk over across there was a used bookstore across from Corrales Elementary where I went. And I would see all these books like, Weirder Than Science and Crazy Things, and just sort of these 1950s, 60s, pulp, terrifying UFOs, lake monsters, whatever else. And I'd buy these books. I'm like, this is so cool. So I'd take them back, and I'd just spend summers reading all these books. I'm like, oh, this is so crazy. But like I sort of got disillusioned because there were all these amazing, weird, wild, sensational stories, but they were nothing like, I was just a kid in Corrales living on dirt road, and there was all the exotic mysteries seemed to be far away. There was the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. There was, allegedly monsters in dungeons in London, wherever else, or UFOs or else. And so I was like, well, this isn't really fair. I don't have anything cool. And then I would walk on the ditches in Corrales, and I would hear stories of La Llorona. And you know, a lot of my Spanish-speaking friends who I grew up with, they're like, "Oh yeah, this is real." I'm like, "It's real?" It's like, yeah. There's a legend about this woman I wrote about in one of my books who you can hear her wailing on, you know, moonless nights or full moon nights, take your pick, crying for children that either she drowned or other people drowned, depending on the story of the tale. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like it happening in my backyard. And then I later on, when I was in high school and college, going to UNM, I took a job as a busboy at the Rancho de Corrales, formerly known as the Territorial House, an old adobe house allegedly haunted. And so I spent time there, and I would talk to Mr. Jaramillo, Mr. J, and I would ask him, "Is there ghosts here?" And he was sort of wink at me. I'm like, "That's not an answer, dude." Anyway, so that's sort of what got me into it. And as I sort of became more of an adult, I realized that a lot of these really dramatic stories I was reading about and I was seeing on Unsolved Mysteries, and That's Incredible, and all these things, is that there were a lot of wild stories, but there was very little actual investigation.
Right.
And I was like, these are really fascinating. Talk ghosts and UFOs and monsters and stuff. I'm like, if these things are real, I want someone to like go there and don't just say like, it is said that.
Right.
Or somebody said like, no, I want to know the truth to it. So that sort of launched me into it.
Really? Okay. So today we're literally and figuratively taking a page out of your book, Cody, this book, Ghosts of Old Town Albuquerque. And we're going to focus on 3 specific stories. But, you know, I know that Cody and you and I had spoken before this, and I said, you know, what stories do we want to pull? Because there were so many of them in Old Town.
There's a lot.
There are a lot of different ghost stories. And, you know, obviously this is one of the oldest, you know, neighborhoods in Albuquerque.
In the state, really.
In the state, yeah.
I mean, you know.
So is that why there are so many ghost stories that kind of persist in Old Town? It's just because it's old, or was it a violent area? Why so many of these stories there?
Well, a lot of it is the history. So our history has been sanitized. My next book that I have coming out is the unsanitized version.
Okay.
Our red light in Old Town was nuts. You think of Dodge City and Tombstone, that is nothing compared to what Albuquerque was.
Really?
But it's not talked about anymore. Mm-hmm. You know that parking lot on south side of Old Town, the big parking lot by the Botker Mansion? Mm-hmm. There were speakeasies there. We had 23 of them that ran open through Prohibition. And the fact there were claims that the local marshal was kind of like just turning his nose to it, like he was on the take, you know. And so it's just that. There's a lot of violence, a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think there's also the cultural influence of storytelling from different cultures coming together. And everybody likes a good ghost story, you know, as entertainment. We all do. That's why horror movies are popular. And we got Ozzy Osbourne and Rob Zombie and Alice Cooper, you know. Yeah. That macabre element fascinates people, obviously. So it's a combination of all of that.
And if you've never been in Old Town Albuquerque after dark, that really also adds to it. Just the ambiance and the low-lit ambiance and the old buildings and the old architecture. Even if you don't know the stories, I think that you can potentially fabricate some in your own mind.
Plus, we've had the ghost tour there for, what 25 years now? So
which
the
honestly,
stories are being talked about.
If you have never done the ghost tour or the walking history tour of Old Town, it is so worth it because it's just fascinating to find out all these stories and the history behind it. So let's dive in. Actually, the first, and I know that in this book you said for a while that it was the first stop on the ghost tour, and that's the La Placita restaurant. Tell me a little bit about what you guys know about La Placita, some of the stories behind it, some of the history behind it, and we can unpack some of the ghost stories that supposedly exist in that building.
So this one's kind of fun. I've done a little bit of research. I found the oldest ghost story that I found was told by a guy named Howard Bryan. He was a reporter for the Albuquerque Tribune, and this was 1977. So he was going there for an art exhibition kind of a thing, and ran into them talking about the ghost. So according to the article, it was Victoriana Armijo, who had died of the plague, and they hear her voice, like calling the employees. And other than that, it was silverware was being messed with on the table. So that's the oldest I could find. But that differs from the modern ghost story. The modern ghost stories, there's 3 ghosts. Okay. You got a little girl, a guy named George, who is the one calling the names, and then, of course, the teenager, which would be Victoriana. The ghost tour still uses the old names that they got from a psychic, so they call the little girl Victoria, and then the older one Elizabeth. That all comes from a psychic, so it's not really necessarily accurate, so to speak. But what's curious is I was in Old Town about 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to get some lunch before we were doing stuff, and I went into the Old Town Cafe. So I'm waiting for my sandwich, and I just asked them out of curiosity, anything strange going on here? It's an old building. Yeah, there's a woman that calls our names. So it went from the initial, okay, there's a woman we hear that calling our names, to it's a guy that's calling our names, then back to a woman calling our names. And then when you're looking at that investigatively, wait a minute, they're not experiencing the same things. It's changing.
Right.
So how much of that is due to the ghost stories being told? People are subjected to that. So you got that initial idea of what you think you're going to expect, and then it moves from that direction and expands on.
I think part of it is sort of talking about that place and others, is that what happens is that there tends to be there's a self-perpetuating process right here, because people go to haunted hotels, haunted B&Bs, haunted restaurants, and part of the reason they're there, not the only reason, part of the reason is because it's supposed to be haunted.
Right.
Yep. So what happens? Well, in psychology, we call it psychological priming, or expected attention. So if you tell people that you might see a ghostly figure down that hallway, well, they might see a ghostly figure down that hallway. And again, one thing that's interesting is that, when I was researching the phenomenology of ghosts, that is, outside of folk tales, that is, these sort of narratives that are placed at a specific location. So as Cody was mentioning, oftentimes these ghosts, they're stereotypes, right? They're the mischievous young girl. They're the angry, jealous lover. There's straight out of Central Casting,
right?
And they're these stereotypes that people. They're the stories that we grew up with. They're the ones we're familiar with. So people plug those into these narratives. And we come to expect that, right? The jealous lover who killed his wife and this and that. And then so all that's part of it. But then when we're getting, for example, where I find especially interesting is to sort of, say, well, we can look at the folklore. We can look at the legends. We can look at the stories. That's all well and good. And I love these stories. We both do. We all do. Everyone loves these stories. Right. But part of me is to go beyond, part of my interest is to go beyond folklore and say, okay, but is it also true? And this is where, for example, the ghosts and the ghost voices. So, the fact is that if it is true, let's just say it's true, that people are, that this ghost George really is mimicking the manager's voice, or mimicking, we should be able to record that. And this is true throughout Old Town. I mean, there's lots of security cameras, lots of people have HD cameras all around. So if these things are actually going on, there's no reason in the world why security cameras or just cell phone and everything else shouldn't be recording these phenomena on a weekly basis.
Right.
So I got 2 points that to go off what he went with. The first one, I got really into reading a lot of parapsychology stuff, and you've probably heard of this. They're calling this stuff veridical hallucinations. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
So my understanding it correctly, they're saying it's happening in your head. It's not actually happening in the environment, which might explain why it's not filmed or whatever.
Right.
But the second thing, let me tell you a story, and kind of it explains a lot. Okay. So when I first started doing tours in Old Town, there had to be a way for people to find me. So they dressed me up as a Ghostbuster. I'm serious. I had a little pack. The pack was a CD player.
Which one were you? Were you the Aykroyd? Or?
I was the dumb one. I don't know. I hated it. I hated it because we went to Maria Theresa's back then, and who are you going to call? Yelling out of the car. Sure. Anyway, so I was doing this tour for like 30 girls, right? And we go by that front window next to the front door. And this pack sucks because, the attachment that goes around your waist is really hard to get off, and the straps, I tried putting washcloths around them they sucked. They would dig into
cut
your
into you.
shoulders.
Yeah.
So by the end of the tour, and at this time we're doing La Placita last. What was supposed to be, a 90-minute thing, it's Gilligan's Island, a 3-hour tour. But I'm there. My shoulders are killing me. I'm talking to them. I got to do the last story. So I pick the pack up and I sit on top of the bars that are on the window. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there talking to them. And all of a sudden, all of them scream and just jump back. I wasn't expecting it. So it made me jump.
Sure.
And when I jumped, the pack slid behind those bars, pinning me to the window.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, I'll be honest, I freaked for like 2 seconds.
Thinking that something had you?
Something had grabbed me, and I could feel the bars. Oh, okay. So now I'm trying to fumble with this thing to get it off. Well, by the time I got loose, whatever had happened, it happened.
Yeah.
And half the group bailed, no tip, just they were gone. The other half.
That's an easy way to get out of tipping.
They're like, oh my God, run.
Oh, I got to go, bye.
Yeah,
later. Only 5 stars, sorry.
Yeah, right. But the other half were excited, and I asked them what they saw, and they said they saw a little girl climbing up the window behind me. I'm like, okay. So at that point, the Southwest Ghost Hunters was involved with the tours. Mm-hmm. And so we have a skeptic element. So I go, okay, well, this is what I didn't see it, but this is what they claim they saw. Mm-hmm. A couple nights later, a couple of my skeptic friends were out there, and they're sitting in that park bench watching that window. It's like, there's got to be something. They said it was glowing. And they're like, it's got to be light. There has to be light reflecting. And so I sit down like, any luck? You figure anything out? And he's like, I don't know, not yet. And as we're talking, we see it. There's a truck driving down, and you see this thing going up the window. So what it is, and this is making an explanation, a very long explanation short. These were old windows. They were probably put in the 20s.
Okay.
So you're cleaning them. So you're taking this ammonia or whatever. Right. It's paint. So as you're spraying the stuff, and then you got to wipe it.
Right.
And you're doing that for decades. It stains the glass. So what happens when you get a high enough vehicle, like a truck, and the lights hit that window, it's actually going uphill slightly. It doesn't seem like it, but anytime you're coming from the river going east, you're going uphill. And it makes this really wild looking pattern on that glass, which is probably what they saw.
Right.
Now, the reason that's important is there's another story in my book. They're talking about an Old Town security guard, and he turned and he saw what he said was a woman carrying a baby. Mm-hmm. But now that we know that the window was capable of producing this really weird effect, that might be an explanation for it. But we were able to replicate it, and I'm looking at it going, that's spooky as hell.
Right.
And so we did a skeptical ghost tour once a month, and I had it on there because it was such a great example of how people can actually really see something that's weird and how that would play into the story. But that stopped in 2005 when the owner's son decided he was going to freak out the tour group, and he hit the bottom pane of glass with his hand too hard, and it broke it, and then it just released the pressure on the window, and everything shattered and just went all over the tour guide. It just goes to show some of these stories might exist because they really do see something freaky that they don't understand. It's misperception of a normal thing.
Right. And you would hit on something too, Ben, that I think may go into it, and that's priming an audience and telling them, this is what's coming up. We hear all these stories. And so, I know that human beings, we try to find, relationships and patterns. And, it's the same that you see, why people think they see, Mary in a tortilla, or that you're looking for these patterns. And so if we're primed, did you hear the story about this little girl? Well, then we see this run. Our brain is immediately, because we're primed, we're thinking, that's what it is. I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, in one of my books, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, I talk about how people throw around these words like Bigfoot or psychic or ghost, but it's from an investigative point of view, it's they're best thought of as labels. Mm-hmm. They're labels for an anomalous experience, an experience they can't explain right away. Because if you say I saw a ghost, what does that mean? There is not agreement on what ghosts are, as he mentioned earlier. I mean, I've talked to ghost hunters who are absolutely certain that ghosts are the spirits of the dead that have come back because maybe they can't rest because their deaths were unavenged. Other ghost hunters say, no, that's completely wrong. You've got this all wrong. Ghosts are actually the hallucinations. They're projected by our minds into the world. Mm-hmm. Other people say, no, that's not right at all. Again, all these are ghost experts, right? And other ones are saying, no, you guys are totally wrong. What is it? It's called residuals. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's the stone tape theory. This idea that where there was a murder or battleground, that the anger and the pain and the tragedy seeped literally-ish, seeped into the trees and the stones and the ground, and that these are then replayed. And so, but I'm like, well, hold on here, like, these can't all be describing the same thing. Right. So even the experts can't agree on what ghosts are. Yeah. And so the point that I try, when people ask me for advice on investigating the paranormal and ghosts specifically, I say, look, it helps to think of ghost as a label for an experience. That is, someone saw something or heard something weird, and the best thing they can describe, it wasn't a Bigfoot, it wasn't a psychic event, it wasn't a UFO. The closest thing is what people think of as a ghost, so it's that label.
Moving on to the next location, and you would kind of mention this idea of a residual haunting, that something so horrible has happened. I think of Gettysburg, and a lot of people think of, the Gettysburg is very haunted. Obviously, that area of the United States saw tremendous tragedy. We have seen it here in New Mexico, but specifically with La Hacienda, I know that there was, at least in the stories that were told on the ghost tour, that there was a murder that happened outside of the building. Mm-hmm. There was a waitress, if I remember correctly, that's a jealous boyfriend.
Yeah, they were saying it's a woman named Mary. So, continuing researching, I did find out that actually it happened in 1985. Okay. The name is wrong.
Okay.
And okay. I'm just writing down what they're telling me. We think it might be this person, right? But I found it and I said, okay, I want to do a blog post on it. So I think the name of the blog post is Uncovering Haunted Secrets in Old Town. Mm-hmm. So I put it in there. The name's wrong. Some of the details of it are wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not by the tree. It was actually a little bit more over.
Okay.
But here's the thing. I got contacted by the family.
Really?
And they were like, well, thanks for telling the truth because, it's like, how do you guys feel about it? Because that's your relative that they're talking about.
This was a real person.
And and today I was walking by a couple weeks ago after the Old Town thing, and they're like, Mary, can you please communicate? And I'm looking at it now going, that's just really disrespectful. Mm-hmm. And so I actually I put a request in with my editor to edit.
Okay. Edit the story.
Because now that I know it's not just folklore or story, which a lot of times it is, but it's a real thing.
Right.
And it's not related because if you look at the history, the hauntings are earlier than that, so it has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
So it's like, I'd like to take that out and correct a couple other things that I've found over time that have been wrong. Some of them are history bits, but that's the way we are. We learn, as we continue on. But so that's one of the ones of, I don't think it's related at all to anything. It was just something that someone thought because they were having experiences in the gift shop. They heard of that, but the information that was put out was wrong. But now that we know that it was tragic and not that long ago, I wouldn't do it if I was doing the tour. And
I would want to pick up on what Cody said, because I think that's a really important and often overlooked aspect of ghost hunting is that in a lot of cases, not all, in some cases, there's no evidence at all that anything ever happened. It's just sort of the folklore and the legend, and the psychic comes in and says something that nobody can verify. Mm-hmm. But in some cases, Cody's right. The people have died there.
Right. There's verifiable evidence. There's verifiable
evidence. And one case that's actually not too far. I won't go into the whole story because it's a complicated one. But is the chemo theater. And I did investigation at the chemo theater many years ago. The story, I won't go into the whole story. Basically, it was said to be haunted by the ghost of a boy named Bobby Darnall, who had died. He didn't die at the theater. There was an explosion at the theater, and he died on his way to the hospital. But to this day, people say that if you don't leave donuts or other things for him, that he will ruin the performance and do bad things to you. And when I published my research on this, I actually got an email from Bobby Darnall's sister, and she thanked me for she's like, it feels weird to have people talking about my dead brother who died, I think, in 1952 or one or something. It's like, Bobby's not haunting the theater. Right. I was like, I know you guys enjoy your ghost lore, and I'm not trying to bring the house down, but she's like, so she was thanking me for sort of telling the true story about it and showing that Bobby almost certainly didn't die there.
Right.
And he has no connection to the ghostly hauntings. Spoiler!
But that's you bring up a really good point too, because I mean it's been used, that story has been used. So I mean, I've taken the ghost tour a number of times, and every time that's one of the locations. You stop at the tree behind La Hacienda, they tell that story. What were some of the other stories that were going on at La Hacienda?
Most of them were, they think it's Sophia Bueller, who was the wife of the man that built it.
Okay.
A lot of the stories, there's one that I was interviewing one of the managers. We were upstairs, and you could hear music, and it sounded like, just normal music, right? And he's like, that's weird. That sounds like it comes in from downstairs. Like, did you turn they have the speakers to play the music while you're dining.
Sure.
He's like, that's off. I don't know what the heck that is. So we went downstairs, and there's nothing. Went back upstairs, we could hear it. Like, you sure there's nothing up here? It's like, no, it's all downstairs. So open the window, and I'm listening out, maybe something from outside's coming in, and you could still hear it. So that was probably like the strangest, we'll call it.
Yeah.
But even with that, there's also stories of the women's bathroom. Probably one of the favorite ones because it's kind of funny. Women went in to use the restroom, and she said a hand, came underneath to give her toilet paper, and she thanked you, but she was the only woman in the building, so she freaked out.
Sure.
But there's all kinds of little stories like that. But the oldest one was recorded by the WPA, and it was a woman named Frances, and this is in an interview. She said she came in to the building, first one inside, and there was a cup of coffee on a table, and she went and she picked it up, but the cup was hot, like it's fresh coffee. And so she puts it down and goes, the cook must have beat me here. So she went back to look for him. Well, here he comes in the front door. He just got there. So it was like, who made the coffee? So it's like little stuff like that. Like, why would the ghosts make real coffee? That's not like they could drink it,
They sound like really helpful ghosts. I mean, they're handing you toilet paper.
I would like a ghost that
maybe,
give me toilet paper and coffee. That's cool.
Maybe they can go down and get the mail while
but
they're
you see
at
how
it.
These little,
take the garbage out.
You get all these little tales, and then you start, as the story's going from one person to another, they become more spooky, and you start adding more details, and then next thing you know, you got this full blown, it's Sophia Bueller. And, well, why is she haunting it? Because she died, and like why?
That's not
There's
a good
no
enough
reason
reason in my book, right?
Right. There's nothing tragic
that
happens there.
Right.
But it's an old building, and it has a kind of a neat little past to it.
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking about Old Town specifically, it's a beautiful area, historic. It's just cool. I mean, I've lived here most of my life. I still enjoy walking around.
Oh, yeah,
it's all sorts of stuff. But there's a couple things about it, right? So as Cody mentioned, as you talked about, it has this rich history. You can see it. It's you can literally see the history, right? But there's a couple things. One, of course, is it's even the name old. Well, you can see where I'm going with this. What is a characteristic of old buildings? Wonky electricity. I know this for a fact.
Yeah,
sure.
Settling, timbers, adobe, mice, rats. I'm not calling out any health department code violations, but the fact is that old buildings, by definition, by their nature, tend to be, they have things go wrong. And the other thing is, Cody was mentioning the sound, where you have sounds coming up. Well, Old Town is pretty densely packed. There's a lot of businesses, a lot of buildings, a lot of people coming and going. And so it's not like these are isolated areas, right? So there's one house, like if you're hearing something in a place, there's lots of possible places. Even if there's no one else in the building, they don't mean nothing.
Right. The source could be very close, and
then adobe walls are a good buffer. It could have been coming from the other side. For all we knew.
Exactly.
So it's just, that's one of those things. But if you're not really investigating, you're just there with somebody, that's freaky. You're not going to go and do the extra steps to check.
Right.
So it becomes a freaky experience, which is then passed to somebody who writes a book about it. And then it gets into the hands of, tour people who are then repeating
and then they
the story.
repeat it, and they tell the story in folklore.
And they add more, and so.
Well, and you also, and this will kind of take us to our last location, and I saved it for last because it's one of my personal favorites, partly because they make amazing pozole, Church Street Cafe. That was a repurposed building, and I know I'm more familiar with that story. Maybe it's because I frequent it because of their pozole. It's amazing. But what is the story about Church Street Cafe?
So the current owner, still alive, Marie Coleman, she bought it was just a house, and she thought it'd be really cool to fix up this place. But she was talked in by her son to make it into a restaurant. So it's expanded. So a lot of it is addition, all that beautiful garden and everything. That's all modern stuff. Mm-hmm. And she said when the construction started, she had a workman who would come up to her and, you tell that woman to stop. Mm-hmm. She's chucking buckets around. She's making this job hell. Like, who? And he said it was a ghost. And she believes it is the ghost of a woman named Sarah Ruiz, who was the last living member of the family. They got a lot of weird traditions there. Like, supposedly if you don't tell Sarah goodnight when you're leaving, she'll turn the lights on behind you. Ben already brought that up, wonky electricity. Uh-huh. But there's that whole concept of it's old, there's stories, and then it just expanded. But the strangest thing, and I this is where I need him, because this is the one thing I can't.
I'm on the spot now.
I can't figure this out, and I want some more. I need help.
Okay. I've often said that about you, Cody, with all due respect. Yes.
Yes. So we were doing Weird Travels, and they filmed this. And we went to this, like a hotel, and we did the interviews. And we found out they were doing the reenactment thing. And we're like, let's go check that out. That would be cool. So we were back on the back patio. It was me, Bob, and Julia, who's running the tours now. And so Bob, we knew Marie well. So Bob, his Dr. Pepper got empty, so he could go back and fill it himself. They're not going to say anything. So he gets up to do that. He's gone 30 seconds, and he comes running up to me. Dude, go to the car, get this and this. And you're like, what's going on, Bob? And he turns and runs away. Like, I'm not going to go to the car. I want to go in and see what the hell's going on.
Right.
And then there's that one room that goes the length of the building.
Mm-hmm. That main dining room, right?
That main dining room, the old part of the building. And I got in there, and there's like probably 12, 15 people or so, all against the walls, and there's silverware all over the floors. And I'm like, what the heck? And he's, yeah, they said, it's like invisible force going from table to table, swiping the silverware off. Wow. And down at the end was a really off channel cameraman who had just powered his camera down. So he didn't get it on film. I talked to the people. They all said this happened. But the big story was they were supposedly reenacting a knife fight between Sarah and her lover. This would be Rafina's father.
Okay.
And it ended up with him leaving. And according to Marie, Ghost doesn't like it when we talk about that. And they were about to reenact it, and that's when this supposedly happened.
Really? Okay.
So that's the one how in the hell does silverware move by itself, Ben?
Yeah.
I was not there, just to be crystal clear.
Neither was I.
Well, look, I've been on ghost hunting TV shows when there was fakery. I'll just leave it at that to avoid any legal issues. Yeah, I would. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'd love to see it. It's interesting. You talked about sort of like there's oftentimes in ghost lore they're like don't do X. Right. Because the ghost, and like in the case of the chemo theater, it's you have to leave something for Bobby, otherwise something bad will happen. Or if you don't, in that case, if you don't say goodnight to Sarah, then either the lights will come on or off, mm-hmm. or else. And so it's this sort of classic ghost lore. Again, it's sort of like appeasing the spirits, right? So mm-hmm. you light a candle for somebody, you do all these sorts of different things. And I'll tell you one quick story. So I've been to the church many times. I love carne adobada. So
okay,
so slightly different angle into it. Yeah. But I remember one time I was tagging on one of the ghost hunting tours. It wasn't one you were on, but it was a couple years back, and it's one of those cases where I actually happen to know a lot about it. I'm not going to cause a stir. I'm not there to. I'm just
sure.
They were friends. Where else? And so we stopped in front of the cafe, and they told all the stories and the pebbles. The pink granite will be mm-hmm. tossed, this and that. And then they all left, and I noticed that there was a waiter who was counting cash. Of course, I worked in many restaurants, so I was familiar with that. So he's sitting there counting cash, and he was there the whole time. They had just closed, or I guess he got early off his shift. So the tour goes on, and he's sitting there, and I'm like, well, this is a good chance to actually talk to somebody. I mean, So I wasn't doing a full investigation. I was just tagging along. I said, so you work here? I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I've worked here for, I think he said 3 or 4 years. I said, so do you say goodnight to Sarah? And he looked and says, well, she never says goodnight to me. And it was just funny that it was just, I mean, he clearly did not believe in the ghost at all.
Sure.
And it was interesting because, again, we had this group of people who were following this tour, and I'm thinking there's someone who works, there's somebody who knows this because they spend their time here.
Right.
Ask that dude because he works here. I mean, again, not to rain on the parade of the tour, but as an investigator, I'm like, the story is cool, but let's talk to somebody who's actually there. Sure. And the guy's like, yeah, dude, whatever.
Yeah. And it also, it always seems to me too that, and you bring it up, and again, not knowing exactly what happened, but, the camera was off. Oh, the camera's in the truck. Oh, I didn't have it's always like. It's
always just.
That's my doom.
TV for a living.
That's what you do,
I don't see it. I'm there after.
Right.
In fact, a few weeks ago, so New Mexico PBS is going to do something about the ghost of Old Town, and they were doing the reenactment part, and so I went with them, and they were doing the reenactment stuff in the Old Town Cafe, so the north end of La Placita, and they were like, well, we're running behind because it's take. You know how it is.
Sure.
Take.
Sure.
So, okay, I'll run to Church Street, let Marie know you guys are running late. So I left. So they did their thing, and the actress is changing in the bathroom. 2 of the cameramen are changing in the bathroom, leaving one guy alone. And they hear this big crash. And so everybody runs out because there was no one there from the business. They literally gave New Mexico PBS the key.
Oh, my gosh.
And trusted them to lock it up. So I looked around, there's nothing wrong. Well, the camera guys went out, and they said there was a couple standing outside looking in the window, watching some of what they were doing. I said, well, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're just doing a documentary thing. They didn't go into detail. Oh, yeah, the little girl was really cute. And then they turned around and walked. And so they ran, of course, to me. Oh, my God, there was a little girl showed up. And I'm like, well, I wasn't there again. But it's like, if I would have been, the first question would have been, are you local? Right. Do they know the ghost stories? Are they messing with the camera crew?
Right.
Because it would be obvious what we were filming.
Right. As we wrap things up here, if people listening to this, my hope is that they get excited to just go to Old Town and, maybe patronize these businesses, eat there, maybe do a little bit. Any advice? If someone out there, because again, we've kind of talked at this from a sort of an analytical
well, you got us,
area.
Of course, you're going to get that.
But if someone out there is like, you know what? No, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I believe in ghosts. These are real. What advice would you give someone if they want to go out and they kind of want to experience this themselves, to just have a good time? But like if you're going to go out and ghost tour, do blank. What would you do to fill in that blank?
I enjoy the ghost stories, but like I've said, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
We do not know how they change over time as the story's being passed from person to person. So you might be hearing something accurate, you might not be hearing anything accurate. But yeah, just take them for what it is. It's just a story. I have no problem with ghost hunting groups as long as it's entertainment. Where I have a problem is they say, we're scientific. You're not. When we got evidence, no, it's not. Just be honest about what you're doing. Having fun, good time, just enjoy it.
Then what about you?
Yeah, I echo everything that Cody just said. Go enjoy it for what it is. Don't assume that the Ghost Hunters tour is telling you the true stuff. They're not necessarily lying. You're paying to be entertained.
Right.
That's why you're there, right? So if you're wanting the true story behind it, Cody's written books. I've written books about it, this and that. By the way, if you're going to be going to Old Town, go to Treasure House.
Yes.
Small local independent bookstore where you can find books by both of us.
Yes.
And just enjoy it. Be in the moment. Put away your cell phones. Just be in the moment, get the hackles, get the scary, get the spooks, but don't assume that what you're hearing is necessarily true.
Right. Well, guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. Happy Halloween to you. Best of luck on your endeavors. Guys watching, thank you for joining us on this inaugural episode of New Mexico Strange. Keep up to date with us here at KRQE.com and on our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.